So here's a big question. Is design an art or a science? And as always, the answer to this one is harder than you might think. So logically, we have three options. It's an art, or it's a science, or it's both, or it's a third thing. Saying that design is one or the other doesn't really hold up. Any design has both intuitive and objective parts to it. It's invented, but it also has to exist according to the rules of the world. A common idea is that design is an overlap, maybe halfway between art and science. After all, it's got parts of both in it, right? But this means that design largely follows the rules of both art and science, at least to some degree, and that everything in design must be either like art or science, and that there is nothing unique to design itself. So instead, the claim here is that design is its own thing. It's a third way between art and science. Design has its own principles, goals, and aims. Design includes things found in science, such as reason, and in the arts, such as creativity. But it has its own distinct way of approaching the world, of learning and inquiring and doing. It's easier to compare the sciences and the humanities, so for example, objectivity versus subjectivity, than it is to compare either of them to design. And this is simply because we're not actually used to talking about design, and we don't really have a good language for it. And it's surprisingly hard to consider what it means to be designerly rather than what it means to be scientific or artistic. But let's give this a try. So maybe by comparing design with the sciences and the humanities, we can become a little bit clearer of what we mean by design itself. So we'll consider three aspects. So this is the subject of each field, which is what they focus on and what they hope to achieve. The time frame, which is when that they hope, or when it is that their work takes place. And the third topic would be process and outcome. So what values do they have and do they place on the idea of working along in a process, and what value that they place or they hope to achieve through the outcomes. The sciences seek to describe the natural world accurately. Science focuses on describing and explaining things that already exist, that are already being something. The arts and humanities try to describe and make meaning of our experience of being in the world. Design, meanwhile, is concerned with making the artificial world. Artificial in the sense that it's not natural, but created, and making in the sense of creating useful objects in the world. Their time frames also vary. Science describes the world as it is right now, even if it's the basis for future prediction. The arts convey our current experience of the world, even if the topics are set in the past or in the future. But design is always focused on the future, at a time when things will be different because of what the designer is creating. And finally, their emphasis on process, which is how we'll get there, and outcomes, which is about what we'll find when we arrive, vary greatly. So the methods of science include controlled experiments and classification and analysis. So when scientists rely on a scientific method, they're extremely invested in making sure that their process is precise and accurate and valid, so that whatever they find can be trusted as being true. So the outcome may not be what's desired from the start, but it's a reliable outcome because it comes out of a reliable process. Artists, on the other hand, are able to use any process or method in the work that they choose. And this is because they're extremely invested in reaching a very particular outcome. And this outcome might be expressing and communicating some aspect of human experience through the work itself. And finally, designers. Designers are really interested in the quality of the desired outcome. So put it another way, this means that they care about achieving certain results, even if they're not attached to any particular vision of an outcome. So a good design process, properly aimed by intentions, but not necessarily aimed at a particular solution in advance, should reveal what the ought-to-be solution is that we will make real. To summarize, science is a well-structured process of inquiry and description that leads to a logical outcome. Whatever outcome results from the scientific method is a truth that's outside the control of the scientists. The arts and humanities, on the other hand, are outcome-focused because they're concerned with effectively relating the human condition. And so the outcome of their process, that vehicle of communication, is their focus. And design, well, design is fundamentally a quest. It's a search for a good kind of outcome without necessarily knowing or being attached to a particular solution through the process, but one which is arrived at through a good process. At the end of the day, this doesn't mean that art and science and design are completely distinct. In fact, the best work often mixes them together. But it does mean that we need to pay attention particularly to the goals, the processes, and the outcomes and the timelines that each area values the most.